The Edmonton Oilers goalie situation has been a wildly hot topic so far this year. Fans are frustrated with how poor Stuart Skinner has played through the first month and a half of the season. And while Calvin Pickard has been fine, his track record in the NHL isn't great. And a lot of people are sitting there saying, listen, if the Edmonton Oilers want to be a serious Stanley Cup contender, they need to go out and acquire a goalie. And last week, when it got floated out by multiple NHL insiders that John Gibson is apparently willing to waive his no trade clause, and the Anaheim Ducks want to do right by their longtime goalie and get him to a contender, people started to connect the dots and say, well, hold up. Why wouldn't the Edmonton Oilers be all over John Gibson, the goalie who took Anaheim on a couple of runs when he was young and had a really solid run as being a top 15, top 10 starter in the NHL? The Oilers should be tripping over themselves, trying to call Anaheim and get a deal done. I'm here to tell you today, John Gibson is not the answer for the Edmonton Oilers. And there are a handful of reasons why. First off, John Gibson's best days, they're behind him. Yes, there were years back in 16, 17, 2017, 18, where he was at a 924, a 926 save percentage. But that was a long time ago. The Anaheim Ducks have not been good for a number of years. And I don't think Gibson is a byproduct of them being poor. I think he's one of the reasons why they haven't been that good. Back-to-back seasons where Gibson has had a save percentage below 900. And I know you're sitting there saying he plays on an awful team. If you get him to a contender, his numbers will bounce back. But go look at the numbers that young goalie Lucas Dostal is putting up in Anaheim. Even though the Ducks are poor and it's the same roster when Dostal or Gibson is in net, Dostal, who barely has any NHL experience, is outperforming John Gibson. That is a big reason why the Ducks are willing to do this. They have their next guy, their next franchise goalie already on the roster and playing better than Gibson, so they want to get out from John Gibson's contract. $6.25 million. It comes with terms still on it. That would be a major, major problem. It will not be easy for them to get off of not only this year, but the final 2 years of John Gibson's contract. And that is point number one, why the Edmonton Oilers should stay away from this. Edmonton's goaltending tandem, while you can argue about the upside of it, it's dirt cheap. Pickard and Skinner make a combined $3.6 million. That is one of the lowest totals in the entire NHL. To bring in Gibson at $6.25 million would wildly throw off the Oilers' cap calculations. One, they would need Anaheim to retain 50%. And even then, Edmonton would have to move a piece off of its roster to be able to afford John Gibson, or they'd have to start operating in LTIR, which could be a problem if Evander Kane ends up returning in January or February. So the money on this is just, it makes it a non-starter almost, if I'm being honest. And some people on Twitter just love to throw it. We'll get it double retained, get some bottom feeder team to eat another 50%, because then Gibson would go from 6.25 to roughly 6.4 to 3.2, and then he'd be down to 1.6. The Oilers could afford 1.6, and while that's correct, how much are you willing to pay here for another team to eat that amount of money for 2 more seasons? That right there probably costs you at least a second round pick. And if the Ducks are looking for a high draft pick to move on from Gibson in the first place, and again, retain a significant amount of money, we could be talking about having to give up a first, a second round pick, and even potentially a prospect to get John Gibson, who, may I remind you, is not that good of an NHL goalie anymore. Do I think you can trust John Gibson be a good 1B? Sure. At this stage in his career, I think he's a good backup, not a starting goalie. So if you're the Oilers, why would you give up a first and a second round pick to bring in a guy who wouldn't be better than Stuart Skinner in the long run? It makes no sense to me. And I know people are frustrated right now with the Oilers goaltending. I get it. But all Calvin Pickard has done since he's been called up to the Oilers at basically this point last season is give them quality minutes and quality numbers. He's close to league average this year. He's above league average at 5-on-5. He's just been god-awful on the penalty kill. And again, he stepped up for them in the playoffs last year. What reason do you have to believe he couldn't do that again? He's given you no reason to think otherwise. And for Stuart Skinner, his numbers right now are actually better than they were a year ago. And how did he bounce back? He was one of the best goalies in the NHL from December until March last year. And while he had some struggles in that Vancouver series in the playoffs, look at his numbers in elimination games. They were sparkling in round 1, games 3 and 4. They went to LA. Stuart Skinner was lights out, changed that series. When he got the crease back against Vancouver, lights out, won them that series, was lights out in the elimination games against Dallas, and was great for the Oilers in the final 4 games of the Stanley Cup final. This goaltending tandem brought the Oilers to within one game of the Stanley Cup final. So the idea that they can't do it again, I think is a little bit foolish. Now, I think the idea that the Oilers should be totally turning off any idea of acquiring a goalie is also foolish. And there is a guy out there who I think they should look at. It's just not John Gibson. It's actually MacKenzie Blackwood out in San Jose. This guy is young. This guy is cheaper. He's on an expiring deal as well. $2.35 million. It's very easy to convince a bottom feeder team to retain 50% of that. The Sharks can't do it. They already have 3 retained contracts. That's the most you're allowed to have on your books. But Edmonton could very easily get Columbus to eat $1.2 or $1.1 million of that deal. Give them a 5th round pick for doing it later in the season. And then you send Pickard to the minors and boom, you have MacKenzie Blackwood, a bona fide 1A, 1B guy to pair with Stuart Skinner. He's 27 years old. They're pretty similar in age and he's an expiring deal. So if you like him, you can bring him back this summer. If it doesn't work, you cut your losses, go back to Skinner and Pickard next season. If there's anyone the Oilers should get, it's someone like a MacKenzie Blackwood. It is not someone like a John Gibson who has not been good in the NHL for a number of seasons. Blackwood, yes. Gibson, no. But honestly, I'm kind of a fan of the Oilers running with Skinner and Pickard again because we saw how it worked out for them last year. They got that close to winning a Stanley Cup. And I'm high on Stuart Skinner. He's a good Edmonton boy. I love his story. I think he will bounce back this season. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do the Oilers need to get a goalie? Do you like John Gibson more than me? Is there someone I didn't even mention that you think the Oilers should be looking at? Sound off. Let me know in the comments. And also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. What's up, Nation citizens? If you like that video, then you need to be subscribed to the Oilers Nation YouTube. Podcasts, live shows, exclusive interviews, and analysis. Everything you need from your favorite voices at Oilers Nation. And you don't want to miss any of it, so hammer that subscribe button.